Welcome, my friends, to a very quick overview breaking down PMBOK Guide 7th edition. Now, I know some of you are going through courses where this is being taught and you want a rapid way of covering the entire book. I'm going to help you cover the main contents of this book in less than 20 minutes. So, without much ado, my friends, let's get into it. I'm going to take you to the whiteboard and we are going to begin writing down all the core information. So if you want to grab a pen and a paper and follow along, I think you'll learn a lot that way. We're going to make it very hands-on and pragmatic. All right, so let's go to our whiteboard. In the PMBOK Guide 7th edition, the first two chapters are very foundational. They help you understand what a project is, why we undertake projects, and then we get to chapter 3, which is about the project management principles. What we're going to do today right off the bat is address these project management principles so that you have clarity on them. The very first principle that we see in the PMBOK Guide 7th edition states, be a diligent, respectful, and caring steward. So we're going to represent this as stewardship, and here on the screen I'm just going to give you reminders of each of the principles. Being a respectful, diligent, and caring steward means that you care about the resources that have been entrusted to you. That means when your organization tells you you're the project manager, you understand the importance of treating these resources with care and respect. These could be a number of resources: human resources, equipment, materials, supplies. We're not going to waste our resources, we're going to value them. That's really the first one. The second thing that we have here in PMBOK 7 is create a collaborative project team environment. Now what this means is you as a leader, remember you are a servant leader, and it's your job to set that temperature. You set the temperature, you regulate it, and people on your team members, they understand how to respect each other, how to interact with each other, and how to move the project forward as a team. Number 3, it says effectively engage with stakeholders. Now, when you think about engagement, the PMI has often defined engagement as working with the stakeholder, okay, attending to their concerns, and it's really a mindset of collaboration. So this one, we call it stakeholder. Stakeholders are anyone who could be impacted by the project, positively or negatively. They're also anyone who can impact the project, positively or negatively. Just remember that in every project, you have stakeholders who are readily available for discussion and to be engaged, and you have some stakeholders who are very hard to interact with, very hard to collaborate with, and it's the job of the PM, whatever the stakeholder, to effectively engage them at the right level at the right time. The next one is one of my favorites here, and this just says that you as a project manager or as someone on the team, you need to focus, and the focus needs to be on value. So it says focus on value. And the key to the value principle is you should be putting on your product owner hat. You should be thinking about your highest priority being to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable product. So this also maps back to the Agile manifesto. Okay, the next one, it just says demonstrate leadership behaviors. So a leader, my mentor John Maxwell would say, a leader is one who knows the way, shows the way, and goes the way. And to demonstrate great leadership skills, you got to show the way. You got to be decisive. You need to be courageous as a leader. So let's go ahead and put in our leadership icon here. And the true measure of leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. As a leader, you should be influencing. All right, so that's it. Demonstrate leadership behaviors. The next one, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, is tailoring. And it just says tailor based on context. Now, what do we mean by tailor? Well, by tailoring, we mean for every project, you should ask the question, which tools are needed? Which toolkit should we assemble for this project? What might we have done before that is not relevant on this project? Let's only focus on what is relevant. So let's cut out any tools, techniques, documents, ideas that are not useful on this project. That's tailoring. So you gotta understand the context and tailor based on context. All right. The next one says build quality into processes and deliverables. When you talk about quality, it's many things to different people, so it's always good to have an apples to apples comparison of quality. Quality, you can benchmark it as 4 things. Quality is fitness for use, conformance to requirements, it's also customer satisfaction, and it's Kaizen, change for the better, continuous improvement. Okay, so you got to build quality into your processes and deliverables. You know, quality has 3 processes itself, and one process is called planned quality management. The second one is called managed quality, which is like quality assurance. That is where you are building quality into the process to make sure you are checking the process as it is proceeding. And the last one, control quality, is more like inspection, and that's building it in to ensure that before your product goes to the customer, it was very well checked. Okay, so after quality, we have navigate complexity. And complexity is a very interesting one, because you got to navigate complexity by introducing a concept that we know all too well, the concept of agility. If you really want to be good at navigating a complex environment, you got to be agile. You might recall, if you read the Agile Practice Guide, the Stacy complexity model. The Stacy complexity model shows you how to navigate that complexity. And you got to break things down into increments and iterations. You got to proceed with intentionality. When you're in a complex environment, you don't just fly by the seat of your pants. You ask, how best can we get this under control? The PMI in PMBOK 7 on page 50 and 51, it says complexity is the result of human behavior. You can never predict humans, can you? Right? Human behavior, system interactions, uncertainty, and ambiguity. It also mentions another source of complexity as being technological innovation. So we have human behavior, system behavior, uncertainty and ambiguity, and technological innovation. These are all factors that can affect complexity. It says continually evaluate and navigate project complexity so that approaches and plans enable the project team to successfully navigate the project life cycle. It says project teams often cannot foresee complexity emerging because it is the result of many interactions such as risks, dependencies, events, or relationships. Alternatively, a few causes may converge to produce a single complex effect, which makes isolating a specific cause of complexity difficult. So these are good thoughts, as a matter of fact, in PMBOK 7 that were not addressed like this in other PMBOK guides. So this is some of the good that exists in PMBOK 7. Okay, because I know a lot of folks do not regard PMBOK 7, and I don't blame them, because PMBOK 7, if you're just taking a look at it newly, you're trying to look for that quality, and you're looking for, okay, what's here that is going to give me something different? And to be quite honest, you may not see it. But let's read together. Let's go to page 51 and read really quick. Human behavior is the interplay of conduct, demeanors, attitudes, and experience of people. Human behavior can also contribute to complexity by introducing elements of subjectivity, such as personal agendas that conflict with the project's goals and objectives. Stakeholders located in remote locations may have different time zones, speak different languages, and have different cultural norms. Then we have system behavior, the result of dynamic dependencies within and among project elements. For example, the integration of different technological systems could cause threats that could impact project outcomes. Then we have uncertainty itself and ambiguity. Ambiguity is a state of being unclear, not knowing what to expect or how to comprehend a situation. Ambiguity can arise from having many options and a lack of clarity on the optimal choice. Unclear or misleading events, emerging issues, or subjective situations can also lead to ambiguity. So when you take a look here, my friends, at complexity, you need to be thinking about these variables. And then the final one, technological innovation, can cause disruption to products, services, ways of working, yada yada. So that's navigate complexity. And that is the 9th principle. Just so you know, I look at these principles as another layer of protection when it comes to your exam. Because you got to think with the PMI mindset, and you got to look at these principles as a way of thinking. All right, so if you haven't read the Stacy complexity model, I'm encouraging you to do that. I think you can get some value from the Stacy model. Remember, the Stacy model, on one axis you've got requirements uncertainty, and on the other axis you've got technical uncertainty, and you got to understand what exactly this is saying. Okay, we are soon getting to the end of this part of the adventure. So the next thing that we have here is optimize risk responses. What do we mean by optimize risk responses? Well, it just means choose the best risk response for the project. Now, when we talk about risks, you got to understand you got positive risks and you got negative risks. See? But what is the best response for the project? Because maybe the best response is to accept the risk by not doing anything, right? Maybe the best response is to go after the risk vehemently. But one thing's for sure, the PMI is encouraging you in this principle, continually evaluate exposure to risk, both opportunities and threats, to maximize positive impacts and minimize negative impacts to the project and its outcomes. Risk responses should be appropriate, cost-effective, realistic, agreed to by relevant stakeholders, and owned by a responsible person. All right. We got 3 more, my friends. 3 more. Okay. So let's move on to number 10. Or did I get them reordered? I think I might have reordered them. Let's go to the next one in my list. The next one is embrace adaptability and resiliency. So what is adaptability? Well, in my mind, when I think about adaptability, I think about bounce back ability, because it says adaptability and resiliency. You got to be adaptable, but you got to be resilient as well, right? You got to be able to morph and change, you know, like Rogue in the X-Men, if you are a Marvel fan. But in this world of project management and agility, we are being encouraged to embrace adaptability and resiliency. You see, it says build adaptability and resiliency into the organizations and project teams' approaches to help the project accommodate change, recover from setbacks, and advance the work of the project. It says adaptability refers to the ability to respond to changing conditions. So that's like being agile, really, when you boil it down. Resiliency is the ability to recover from setback. And one of the best ways of being resilient is to think about a measure of redundancy that you should be building in. You should be building in some measure of redundancy, all right, into whatever system you're working with. So there is one very important one that I didn't talk about. I should have spoken about this earlier, but it's not too late. This one is one of my favorites, and I totally skipped it. But this one says, recognize, evaluate, and respond to system interactions. So this one is all about being a systemic thinker, looking at the project not only from a micro perspective, but also from a strategic systems perspective. And this just means you're seeing the big picture view of how all the moving parts interconnect. And it's a very important one, because if you do not think systemically, you're just seeing the silos and you're not seeing the coming together of the idea or the business or the vision or the solution, whatever it is. It says recognize, evaluate, and respond to dynamic circumstances within and surrounding the project in a holistic way to positively affect project performance. So you got to be systemic in your approach. You got to be a systems thinker. It says a project is a system of interdependent and interacting domains of activity. Systems thinking entails taking a holistic view of how project parts interact with each other and with external systems. Systems are constantly changing, requiring consistent attention to internal and external conditions. Being responsive to system interaction allows for project teams to leverage positive outcomes. All right, my friends, you're doing the count. We have one final one. And the final one that we're going to talk about here, final principle, this is change management. Change 101. And it just says enable change. What do we mean by enable change? Well, it just means don't stand in the way of change. Enable change to achieve the envisioned future state. The envisioned future state is like the end goal, the desired final point that the project is meant to be heading towards. And this is just saying, enable that change. Be a change agent. See, some people stand in the way of change. Some people are scared of change. But this is giving us the go-ahead to enable change to achieve the envisioned future state. So, my friends, there you have the very first part of the PMBOK Guide 7th edition. The 8th edition is coming out. Let's not talk about that. We'll talk about that a different day. But that's your 7th edition principles done, okay? The next place we're going in this book is the second section, part 2. So let's go to part 2 and let's talk about these domains. Now, these performance domains, it says it's a group of related activities. So the funny thing about these domains is they're not knowledge areas, and they're not process groups, and they're not principles. There's overlap with a lot of content from previous PMBOKs and ideas. So when you look at domains, I just need you to see it as a glob of stuff that helps the project manager, okay? A glob of stuff that helps the project manager. But it's important that you see this stuff as the foundation. Without this, your domains will fall flat. Remember, the Agile Manifesto says you should value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Remember that? So here's the mindset. Be a diligent steward. Engage and serve the team. Work with your stakeholders to move things forward. Value is important. If it's not valuable, don't do it. Leadership, it's all about influence. So be decisive and be a good servant leader. Tailor the tools and the techniques to the project. Remember, quality is fitness for use, conformance to requirements, customer satisfaction, and Kaizen. You got to build it in, make sure there's quality in the process and the product. Navigate complexity with intention. Think about the world of Agile when you're doing this. Consider the best risk response. Be adaptable. Be a shapeshifter. Systems thinking is important. Bringing everything together, seeing the holistic whole is vital. And last but not least, we got change. You got to enable change to achieve the envisioned future state. Okay? So, that's this piece, the first piece. We're going into the domains now. Now, let me read very quickly for you from page 7 what exactly is in these project performance domains. Okay? So, as it said, a group of related activities that are critical for the effective delivery of project outcomes. We have stakeholders, team. We've already talked about those in the principles, right? Development approach and life cycle. We haven't really talked about that. Planning, a no-brainer. Project work, sounds quite familiar. Delivery, measurement, and uncertainty. So, with that said, my friends, let us jump into the next part of our journey together. And this is where we're going to talk about domains. Okay? These domains are not necessarily going to come out on the exam like, the ITTOs used to. So I don't want you freaking out thinking you have to cram these domains. No, you don't have to cram anything. But in understanding the narrative of project management and what is relevant to project management, it does help to be able to speak to these things, okay? Now, I know the PMBOK Guide 8th edition will be on the way eventually, very soon, but this is really to give you some insight to what is in the 7th, because I know many of you haven't even opened it up, okay? So, let's talk about these domains. This is going to go extremely quick, I promise. We're going to be out of here before you know it. All right. The first domain, and I'm going to show you how they all map together, how they interact. The first domain is stakeholder. So think about it. As a project manager on a project, it would make sense for you to know who the project could impact. How do these folks see themselves as being impacted by the project, or maybe they can impact the project? What are their names? What is their contact information? Let's get some information down. Then we should think about team, right? If you really wanted to think about them in some sort of order, you would say you know the key stakeholders first and then the team. But if you're in the world of Agile, then you probably know your team members already, right? You know your team members, and then each time you're given something to do, you meet new stakeholders. So the team could actually come before the stakeholders in terms of the order of you knowing who's who. But in terms of you knowing what the project is about, you got to know your stakeholders, right? Know what they want, know what they need, and then you understand what the project is about, and then you know who to hire, and then you acquire the team, right? So when you talk about stakeholders, you got to identify them, understand them, analyze them, prioritize them, engage them, and monitor them. We need to talk about stakeholders. When you talk about the team, you got to understand your team members' competencies. You got to understand what you need first, and then you go ahead and then you get the team, you acquire the team, you equip the team, you lead the team, and you get them to synergize. Especially in an agile environment, what you want is synergy beyond the usual totalitarian, I am in charge, I'm the boss, you do what I say. No, we don't want that. We want collaboration. So it's a different kind of a mindset that the PMI is gravitating towards these days. So they talk about leadership skills. They talk about, for high-performing teams, they have shared understanding, shared ownership, trust, collaboration, resilience, empowerment, recognition, words like that, okay? Then we get into the next domain, and this is development approach and life cycle. So if I was going to say which domain is probably the least redundant comparing it to other versions of the PMBOK guide, I would say the development approach and life cycle is perhaps more relevant because it hasn't been tackled in this way in previous PMBOK guides. When it comes to the development approach and life cycle domain in PMBOK 7, some of the language could be a little bit confusing, unfortunately, because it somewhat contradicts Agile Practice Guide language in some respects. So let me clarify what exactly this domain is about. It says the development approach and lifecycle performance domain addresses activities and functions associated with the development approach, cadence, and lifecycle phase of the project. And then it goes into a few definitions. So it says deliverable, any unique verifiable product. Development approach, a method used to create and evolve the product, service, or result, like predictive, iterative, incremental, adaptive, or hybrid. Cadence, a rhythm of activities conducted throughout the project. So if your sprints are every 2 weeks, then that is an example of a cadence. If your meetings, your retrospectives are every 2 weeks at the end, that's an example of cadence as well. Then we have project phase, a collection of logically related project activities that ends in the completion of one or more deliverables, and project life cycle, the series of phases that a project passes through from its start to its completion. So they've broken it down, nicely. They've shown you development approach is different from project life cycle, and that's very good. But when you turn the page over and you begin getting into the nitty-gritty of the predictive, the iterative, the incremental, and so on, when it gets to iterative and incremental, there's more harm than good done in that section. So I need to unravel that a little bit. A predictive approach, it says, is useful when the product and project requirements can be defined, and everybody knows what predictive is, right? Hybrid is a mix of agile and predictive. So that's page 36. Now, page 37 is where I don't think a very good job was done. I don't think. So in 37, it says iterative. Try different ideas to clarify scope, approach, and requirements. I need a method to capture ideas that might change. And then you've got examples of an evolution of feedback and adapt, feedback and adapt, feedback and adapt until you get to the final thing. But that kind of gives an impression that there could be deliveries. And I wanted to make sure that you folks are aware that iterative does not mean frequent delivery. It means change could be frequent, but the delivery is one time. So when you look at that, I don't want you thinking that, okay, well, you can deliver a mouse and a keyboard. No. You would only deliver the phone at the end, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. So you gotta understand how it works in the real world. It might be helpful for us to read page 36 and to try to unravel it, just so that we're all on the same page. And then when it comes to incremental, this is not a very good illustration, because it says incremental, progressively develop features and functions. That is not the best illustration, because it gives the impression that, well, you're building and you're not yet delivering, but when you get to the final house, then it's done. And that's actually different from how incremental is explained in the Agile Practice Guide. In the Agile Practice Guide, incremental is frequent, smaller deliveries. Iterative is a one-time delivery after many rounds of reviews and modifications, but incremental is not referring to the progressive development, it's referring to the delivery. The delivery is incremental. Does that make sense? Okay, let's read together. PMBOK Guide, 7th edition, page 36. So I want to go straight to where it says incremental and stuff in the middle, because at first it talks about hybrid being a combination of adaptive and predictive. And then if you get into the middle, it says hybrid approaches often use an iterative or incremental approach. An iterative approach is useful for clarifying requirements and investigating various options. An iterative approach may produce sufficient capability to be considered acceptable prior to the final iteration. An incremental approach is used to produce a deliverable throughout a series of iterations. Each iteration adds functionality with a predetermined time frame, a time box. The deliverable contains the capability to be considered as completed only after the final iteration. So I have trouble with that, because that's not what incremental is defined as in the Agile Practice Guide. So I actually want to recommend more of the Agile Practice Guide when you really want to get a better understanding. Okay? So on page 38, it then goes into adaptive approach and says, adaptive approaches use iterative and incremental approaches. However, on the far side of the adaptive methods, the iterations tend to get shorter. The product is more likely to evolve based on stakeholder feedback, and so on and so forth. So I'm not a huge fan of this part of PMBOK 7. I think you'll get a better idea of how incremental is frequent, smaller deliveries that need less change, whereas iterative is one-time delivery after several rounds of change. And then agile is a combination of frequent change and frequent small deliveries. Okay. Other than that, I'm glad it's in there, so that people can keep it on their radar. Okay, let's get back into what we've got. That's probably the more in-depth talk we're going to have, because everything else is gravy from here. The planning domain, it needs no introduction. Everyone knows planning. This is pretty much just a rip-off of the planning process group. So there's really no need to go into this a whole lot. We plan everything under the sun in project management, don't we? We plan scope and schedule and cost and quality, resources, communications, risk, procurement, stakeholder, and all that stuff. All that stuff is talked about in the book. All right. It says the planning performance domain addresses activities and functions associated with the initial, ongoing, and evolving organization and coordination necessary for delivering project deliverables and outcomes. That's the planning domain. I'm not going any further than that. That's pretty much it. There are some interesting aspects when it talks about planning, how to report on metrics, communication, procurement, changes, and so on. But let's move on. I think that's enough for now. Let's get to the project work performance domain. All right. Project work. And it reads on page 69, the project work performance domain addresses activities and functions associated with establishing project processes, managing physical resources, and fostering a learning environment. You can see it's a hodgepodge of many different things from a knowledge area standpoint, right? Establishing project processes is very different from managing physical resources. Establishing project processes, more than anything else, is what we would look at integration or maybe some aspects of quality for. You see, so it bunches many things together, this domain. So we have a few topics here: project processes, maintaining team focus, communication, managing physical resources, working with procurement. I mean, it's all over the place. Then it goes a bit into deliverables. So I don't want to bore you by going into the mass of details. You would actually save yourself a lot of unnecessary turmoil if you stayed away from reading this book. Oh my goodness. Reading a book, with an intent to take the exam. That would just be my 2 cents. I know some people might have had a different experience, but I can only speak to what I'm perceiving right now, just reading the thing. Okay. Let's go to our next domain. The next domain that I will address here is the delivery domain. So let's hone in on that really nice. Delivery performance domain is number 6, and it says the delivery performance domain addresses activities and functions associated with delivering the scope and quality that the project was undertaken to achieve. We have the delivery of value talked about. We have requirements mentioned there under deliverables. We have some talk of scope, some talk of quality, some talk of change. One good place is the suboptimal outcomes. What happens if you get a suboptimal outcome? And the answer is you keep going. So that's project work. That's the delivery, I beg your pardon, performance domain. Let's put that on the screen. go. All right. The 7th edition is probably the least engaged with PMBOK guide across companies, because I go to companies to train, and a lot of the companies you won't even find a single copy of this anywhere. It's the least used because people didn't know what to make of it. First of all, you start with principles and then you slap in some alien domains that no one's ever seen. It's hard. And that's why I wanted to show up today to help you make sense of these things so that you'll be able to compare it with what you know or what you've learned for your PMP or CAPM, and you'll be able to make sense of it. Okay? All right, let's go to our next performance domain. Now, of all the performance domains, I think this one is probably the one that adds more value than any of the others. So development approach and life cycle, the intention was good, but I don't think they pulled it off nicely. They should have read the Agile Practice Guide for better context. But the measurement performance domain, I would say that one was fairly well written. It says here, the measurement performance domain addresses activities and functions associated with assessing project performance and taking appropriate actions to maintain acceptable performance. So it says here a few definitions. Metric, a description of a product or project attribute and how to measure it. Baseline, the approved version of a work product used as a basis for comparison and dashboard. And what I liked about this was leading indicators. Leading indicators predict changes or trends in the project, and lagging indicators. Lagging indicators measure project deliverable or events. They provide information after the fact. Leading indicators, if the change or trend is unfavorable, the project team evaluates the root cause. So leading indicators have an advantage in keeping you ahead of the curve. It talks about effective metrics being smart, specific, meaningful, achievable, relevant, and timely. It then goes into different types of metrics. Deliverable metrics, information on errors or defects, measures of performance, technical performance measures, and then it talks about these delivery metrics, work in progress, lead time, cycle time, queue size, batch size, process efficiency. Those are helpful. Then it talks about baseline performance metrics, things like measuring your schedule variance, schedule performance index, cost variance, cost performance index. Goes into resources, planned resource utilization compared to actual resource utilization, planned resource cost compared to actual resource cost. It goes into business value, which is quite helpful because we don't talk about this enough. So it goes into business value, cost benefit ratio, planned benefits compared to actual benefits delivery, ROI, return on investment, NPV, net present value. Goes into stakeholders, NPS, net promoter score, mood chart, morale, turnover. Then it goes into forecasts, ETC and EAC, VAC, TCPI, regression analysis, and throughput analysis. And honestly, as a project manager, you should know what these mean. It would be helpful if you did. And then finally goes into dashboards, shows you a dashboard example, you know, those traffic lights in the reports you folks, some of you use. And then you turn the page over. It gets into information radiators, visual controls, Kanban boards, burn up charts, and then the earned value S curve and stuff like that. And last but not least, measurement pitfalls, which is actually my favorite. The Hawthorne effect, the very act of measuring something influences behavior. Therefore, take care in establishing metrics. For example, measuring only a project team's output of deliverables can encourage the team to focus on creating a large volume of deliverables rather than focusing on deliverables that will provide higher customer satisfaction. So you want to measure the right stuff. Vanity metric is a measure that shows data but does not provide useful information for making decisions. Demoralization. If measures and goals are set that are not achievable, the team's morale may fall. Misusing the metrics, like punishing the team. I added that one. Confirmation bias. As human beings, we tend to look for and see information that supports our point of view. And correlation versus causation. A common mistake is interpreting measurement data, confusing the correlation of two variables with the idea that one causes the other. It's a very good read, but that's pretty much it. As you can tell from my coverage, I find that to be of value, pragmatically speaking, for the project manager. All right, let's go into the final thing here. Final thing in these domains is uncertainty. And we've kind of already talked about uncertainty today when we talked about the principles, so kind of covered this somewhat implicitly. So let's read about it very quick at a high level. So when we talk about uncertainty, we usually bucketize this as risk. It says the uncertainty performance domain addresses activities and functions associated with risk and uncertainty. A few helpful terms: uncertainty, a lack of understanding and awareness of issues, events, paths to follow, or solutions to pursue. Ambiguity, a state of being unclear. Complexity, a characteristic of a project or program or its environment that's difficult to manage. Volatility, the possibility for rapid unpredictable change. And risk, an event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on one or more project objectives. In the domain, it goes into various types of uncertainty, and honestly, I'll tell you, as far as bang for the buck on your exam, it's very low. But in terms of real-world understanding, pragmatism, and project management prowess, this could offer value. So we have ambiguity. It says there are two categories of ambiguity: conceptual ambiguity and situational. Conceptual is the lack of understanding, and it occurs when people use similar terms or arguments in different ways. For example, the statement, "the schedule was reported on track last week," is not clear. It isn't clear whether the schedule was on track last week or whether it was reported on last week. And then it has situational ambiguity. It surfaces when more than one outcome is possible, having multiple options. And then it goes into complexity again, a characteristic of a program, project, or environment which is difficult to manage due to the human behavior, system behavior, or ambiguity. And it has some other information that is not a bad read, but if you're banking on acing the exam by just reading this book, I want you to understand that is not very accurate, because you could read all you want on the 7th edition, even on the 6th edition, and you could still find the exam to be challenging. So what I'm saying in effect is understand these stories, okay? I've shown you 2 stories today. I've shown you the story of the principles, which I think will give you a better bang for the buck on the exam, just having this as a mindset. Okay? And then I showed you the domains, 8 of the domains, and I gave you some commentary for you to better understand what exactly is in here. But again, I am not guaranteeing that knowing any of these is enough. This is just helping you with your thought process and your language. To really do well on the exam, you must have taken copious questions, gotten into the heart of the thinking, the psychology for the exam. And I'm going to teach you just a little bit of the psychology today, okay? Because I want you to go away being confident in tackling these questions on the exam. All right, so at a very high level, the thought process to answering any question is as follows. You must define what the problem is as clearly as possible. Okay? Don't just say, oh, it says we're running late, but you don't know why we're running late, right? So the problem is we're running late. You got to go a step further and you got to identify why are we late. Identify the root cause, and then you have to very quickly generate alternatives, all of this in seconds as you're going through the exam content. Then you have to choose the best alternative. Then you need a sanity check. Implement it in your mind's eye, in your head, and ask, if I did this in the real world, will it solve the problem? So you gotta implement it. And last but not least, you gotta verify, did the solution work? Always asking in your head, if I did this, will it work? And I call this the dig sieve approach. DIGCIV. Let me give you an example. A project is running late. What should the project manager do? Crash the project, fast track the project, call the sponsor, troubleshoot with the team. It wouldn't be crash or fast track. You know why? Because you don't know the root cause. You see, you got to know the root cause. So defining the problem, identifying the root cause, generating alternatives, choosing the best alternative, implementing it, and verifying is the way to go. All right, I hope you got value from this. If you did, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in another episode soon. If you haven't checked out my 500 questions for the PMP exam, check the channel. I have 500 questions that will get you pretty sharp on this test. All right? You take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now. Thank you. Thanks for watching.